Hello everyone, my name is Nathan, also known as the Journeyman Philosopher, and welcome to the latest episode of the Fireside Chat Series. I wanted to talk about something today that really is getting very philosophical, because I've often encountered the question from both sides of the fence, as it were. How do you believe in God and yet still trust in science? And to me it's always been really self-evident that they're the same thing, but I will do my best to explain the conclusions that I've come to along the way around this particular area. So, as I've shared before in some of my previous videos, my family is full of engineers. On both sides of the family, in fact. And I was taught from a very young age to have a very scientific mindset. Everything has an answer. You just have to know where to look in order to find it. Everything makes sense. Everything follows a set of laws. And those laws are immutable. So if you do the same thing multiple times with the same input, you will get the same output every time. Right? That's the basis of pretty much all science, is that as far as once we understand what it is that we're doing, we can reliably get the same result by performing the same experiment. So I've had atheist friends of mine over the years, quite a few times actually, comment that it's strange that I can have that sort of perspective on the world and yet still believe in some sort of supreme intelligence, some sort of God. And like I said, to me those two things are actually the same. To me, what religion and science are doing is the same thing, but they're coming at it from opposite directions. So religion is an attempt to explain the world from a time when we simply didn't understand very much. A lot of things were attributed as acts of God when they were simply things that we didn't understand, we didn't comprehend. And increasingly more and more things that were described in the holy texts, like the Bible, are now reaching a point where we can actually explain what perhaps may have happened. Things like, the flood. It's described in the Bible with, Noah building the ark. I'm not necessarily saying that anybody sat down and built a big wooden boat and saved all the animals. That's perhaps more that's more a story that's meant to be a lesson rather than necessarily factual history. But the flood certainly did happen, and we now have evidence, scientific archaeological evidence, which confirms that there was actually a large rise in sea level, in all over the world, that matches, broadly speaking, the events that were described in the Bible. So again, they're not exclusive in most cases. Now, a lot of the things in the Bible I do believe are not meant to be taken as literal truth. I believe that they were told as stories in order to teach lessons to people. So, God turning people into salt, for example, and, speaking through burning bushes and, all of that sort of thing. They're metaphors. They're meant to teach. But there is also a lot of history involved, because that was how people recorded history back then. They recorded it as stories. It wasn't like it is today, where it's very matter-of-fact, very and then sequence of events. One thing happens after another. One thing leads to another. Thousands of years ago, history simply wasn't recorded that way. It was recorded as stories. It was recorded as in the tales of the bards, and everything was made into something that was larger than life, because that was how people remembered. It was much easier to remember a fantastical story than it was to remember something that was a bit more bricks and mortar, the stuff happening on the ground. that's how history was told. So I think a lot of the holy books and a lot of writings from that time in general follow that sort of theme, where there is probably some amount of historical fact buried in there somewhere, but it's not necessarily exactly what is actually written on the page. There will be some amount of exaggeration and creative license taken in order to, as I said, help people remember the story, to help people remember the history, and also to increase the impact, to increase the lesson. So, religion and science, coming at the same thing from opposite directions. One is attempting to explain that which cannot be explained, which is religion. They use acts of God and other such things in order to try and explain things that people simply didn't understand. The other, of course, being science, which is the art of learning, basically. Science is all about increasing the human race's knowledge and understanding. It works on the general principle that everything is understandable if you know enough. If you have enough building blocks, anything can be put together. Which I believe is true. Everything in the universe follows a certain set of laws, and those laws are immutable. That's not to say that we understand all of them, because we don't, because our understanding is constantly evolving, but the laws themselves don't change. Our understanding of them changes and evolves as we continue to progress, as we continue to learn more and delve more into the secrets of the universe. Then obviously we will learn more, and we will learn that some of the things we believed to be true in the past were not true. That is certainly the case. So it's not necessarily to say that we understand everything in the universe, because we certainly don't. And any scientist who tries to tell you that we do understand everything is a crackpot. Because a good scientist always understands, as Einstein said, the more I learn, the more I realise I understand nothing. There's always going to be more secrets, there's always going to be more mysteries to be delved into. So when you look at something like, for example, the birth of the universe, right? It's usually one of the big sticking points I've found, where the more religious ones tend to go with, there's especially the Bible story of, the earth was created 6,500 years ago, Garden of Eden thing. I don't think that's true. I think we've got fairly conclusive scientific proof that the planet is older than 6,500 years. Again, we're going back to the story being a lesson to be learned. The Garden of Eden may have existed in some form. I don't think it's how it is described in the holy texts. I don't think it was like a walled garden specifically designed by God with the tree in the middle that was forbidden for anyone to go near. I don't think it's like that. But the idea of a Garden of Eden, like a paradise, maybe not so far from the truth. I don't know. That particular part of the story, I'm not going to firmly comment one way or the other. But when you look at the birth of the universe, we've got a pretty good idea about what happened, as far as the Big Bang is concerned, and the emanation of matter from that central exploding point, So there's an outbreath of the universe where everything expands, gets bigger and bigger and bigger, everything gets further and further away, and then ultimately there will be an in-breath where that reverses and everything comes back together again, meets in the middle, another big bang, the universe expands again. I think that system, to a certain extent at least, is fairly well understood. We have a pretty good working knowledge of how that works, just from studying how the universe has worked, over the last couple of 100 years, where we've been able to do that. So this seems to be one of the big sticking points between science and religion, where the religious ones don't want to believe in the Big Bang. And even the ones who do, there's always an asterisk there. They're not quite convinced, and if something comes along that they like better, they'll jump on that train. Whereas science tends to take the attitude that, well, the Big Bang was the start of the universe and that's an end of it. There was no intelligence involved, it was just happenstance. Now, I don't believe that was true. There always has to be something that comes first. You can't create anything out of nothing. We now have a pretty firm understanding, as far as science is concerned, that everything is energy. Absolutely everything that exists is created of some form of energy. So, if the universe was created by the Big Bang, that's fine. I can accept that theory. It looks pretty good. You know, it's very well researched. There's a lot of really good, very intelligent people who've contributed to that theory over the years. But where did the matter come from? And I have seen a few theories around this, and none of them really seem to make a whole lot of sense. It seems to be a lot of guesswork, and a lot of grasping at straws in order to try and explain something that, in this particular case, I do believe is genuinely unexplainable. This is where God comes into things. So my image of God is not, an old dude sitting on a golden throne with a big beard and robes in the clouds throwing thunderbolts at people who displease him. That might be Odin. But that's not, when I think of the idea of God or spirit, those two words are kind of interchangeable. I tend to use them both in different moments. When I think of God, that's not what I'm thinking of at all. That is, I believe, that is humanity applying our own foibles onto a force that is so much greater than us. While I do believe the line "as above, so below" is relevant, and certainly seems to hold true in a lot of cases, all you need to do is look at an atom versus the solar system to start to see where "as above, so below" starts to apply. I don't believe it works the other way, and I think this is the mistake a lot of people make, especially certain ones in religion that have written extensively about these sorts of things, where that you see something on the ground, you see something that's happening in front of you, even just the human form, and you assume "as above, so below" must mean "as below, so above." It must mean that everything that is above us looks the same as we do, which I'm not sure is true. I don't think that's right at all. So what is God if he's not the old dude in robes, smiting people and talking through burning bushes? To me, God is simply an energy, same as everything else. God is the energy. God is energy. All energy that exists comes from somewhere. It has to, because nothing can ever be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed. So if nothing can be created, if it can only be transformed, it stands to reason that before it was making up the universe and us and everything that we see around us, it must have been something. It must still be something, because time doesn't really exist. It's an illusion which is entirely relative to our own perspective, but that's a whole nother story. If time doesn't exist, so there was no before or after, there is only the eternal now, it still had to come from somewhere. It didn't just magically appear from nothing. Can't do that. The laws of science say you can't create or destroy anything, you can only change its form. And we've fairly conclusively proven that to be true. So it stands to reason that God is energy. God is all of the energy. God is the source, at least, of all the energy that was used to create the universe, to create us, to be everything. This is kind of what I believe to be the truth, with lines such as "we were created in God's image." I don't believe that means he looks like us and we're template copies of God and he's got, 10 fingers and 2 ears and all of that sort of stuff. But it does mean that we were created from the energy that is him, or her, or it, or they, or whatever term you want to use. I don't believe any of them are correct or incorrect. They are simply descriptors to try and describe something that we cannot understand. The word God literally means the unknowable. which is what it is. It's beyond the scope of what it is possible for a human being to understand. It's like an ant trying to understand an elephant. It just is never going to be able to do it, except this is an ant trying to understand the entire universe. Because when you look at things on that sort of scale, we're not much bigger than an ant. We're pretty insignificant as far as things go. When you compare us to the vastness of the universe and the vastness of, correspondingly, the vastness that must be God, that must be spirit, it's enough to make you feel pretty small sometimes. It's enough to make you feel pretty insignificant, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I think in some ways that does take a little bit of the weight off of us. And it does mean that we look a little bit silly when we start taking ourselves really seriously. Because we are just ants crawling on a rock, hurtling through space at some ungodly speed. In the vast scheme of things, we don't really matter that much. We're not that significant. We're not that profound. Not compared to the entirety of God, the entirety of spirit, the entirety of the universe. So I think the moral of the story here is don't take yourself too seriously. But getting back to the original point, this is how I believe that science and religion intersect. This is where I believe that this is where I believe the bridge is that they have never quite been able to build and cross in order to come to a working understanding of each other, because they're not talking about different things. Religion talks about God as being this unknowable, ineffable, amazing force. Science talks about the creation of the universe as being this amazing, ineffable force. They're talking about the same thing. At least as far as I'm concerned, they're talking about the same thing. They're both talking about God. They're just using different terms to describe it. If the universe follows a set of immutable laws, God is the one that sat down and wrote them. He is the one that set everything into motion. He is the one who contributed the energy that went into creating the Big Bang, which then followed the rules and the laws of the universe in order to create everything else. To me, that makes perfect sense. That is obviously how things are. Now, I understand that other people have other perspectives. Some of you watching may not agree with me. To me, that has always made the most sense. That ties everything up into a knot in some ways, because it means that everyone was right. To some extent, at least, everyone was right. It's just it's mostly been an argument over terminology and semantics, without anybody ever really understanding that everyone's arguing about the same thing. So that's all from me for today. Hopefully there was something in all of that was useful. If not, at least hopefully it was thought-provoking. Until next time, take care and goodbye.